Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again, Chad.
Good to see you, Lauren. Happy to be here.
Great. Me too. Thank you all so much for joining us today at Brand Innovators TrendWatch Summit. As Keith kind of mentioned, I'm sure we are all able to attest how the industry has been affected in numerous ways by COVID-19, but it's also evolved a lot due to the pandemic, and we're going to talk through many of the challenges that were faced, as well as how the industry was able to respond. Before we are able to dive in with Chad, I want to take a quick second just to introduce myself. As Keith mentioned, I'm Lauren Hundley. I'm a sales manager specializing in the health and pharma vertical here at Samsung Ads. And just taking a quick step back, for those who are listening and may not be familiar, Samsung Ads as a whole has access to hundreds of millions of devices, from our ever popular smart TVs to our beloved Galaxy devices. Our brand safe inventory, which is fueled by our exclusive data and insights, provides our partners with unique and holistic access into their high valued audiences' viewership habits, which they can then utilize to target and activate against in CTV and digital environments, which provides an all-encompassing solution, which is not only measurable, which is more important now than ever, but also bridges the gap between their linear and digital marketing efforts. So today, we're going to be talking with Chad, who is the Senior Director of Consumer Experiences. But Chad, I'll kick it over to you if you want to formally introduce yourself and
Sure.
Jump into kind of telling us a bit about your role and all your work at J&J.
Sure. Yes, I lead our consumer experience group, which is a global team dedicated to capabilities around media, precision, ad tech, martech, healthcare professional, omnichannel communications, and e-commerce. So it's a fairly broad remit with a nimble but excellent team, and yeah, we're working on both delivering to our markets current capabilities while also looking out for what's coming next.
Right. And I mean, 16 years, that's an amazing tenure. And it sounds like you've done some amazing work, and I'm sure there's a lot more in store for the future. Before we really get into the meat of the content, I had to ask, do you have a favorite J&J consumer product or something that you can't live without?
Oh my goodness. I use so many. I mean, Zyrtec, literally. But I've kind of become addicted to Listerine too, which was not something earlier in life that I had. But,
fair enough.
It does become a habit. That's, you need that hit.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I realized, getting ready and talking to you last week, how many J&J products I have in our household. I love the Neutrogena lines, but we also have children's Tylenol.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a firm believer, if you have children's Tylenol, then you usually need regular Tylenol as well.
We believe so too.
Yeah. And I've actually always been a huge Darby's fan, even before the acquisition. But these are just a few of the amazing brands that are part of the massive portfolio that you oversee. So with that, can you talk a bit about the lessons that were learned from the pandemic and how they impacted your marketing strategies, specifically for TV and video?
Yeah, I mean, it's shifted the landscape in a few areas. I would probably point to three. One is obviously eyeballs. So nearly 30% of the TV viewing in the US is now on CTV. So you can't get away from that. We do take an audience first approach. So we're looking at following specific eyeballs around wherever they're viewing. It's kind of back to the future where we really want to understand who they are, where they're watching, and then go into those channels with a sufficient approach from a reach and frequency perspective. So, and purely on a reach basis, yeah, we need to be playing in CTV. But it does change the mix a little bit. So even as we're looking into this year with rates going up, inventories going down, we're also asking bigger questions. Do we need that full 15 or 30 for storytelling purposes? What other channels are available? If there is, cost implications to what we're looking at. From an overall video standpoint, I think you can't look at the past year and a half and not look at the rise of TikTok. So People are spending
Right.
30 more minutes on their phone, which is, almost 20% more time on their phones in the last year or two. Reddit, Snap, Twitter also had great years. Facebook continues to stay in the mix, but TikTok has just become an explosive platform as well. That's got to be part of that video conversation or that watch conversation.
Right.
The third one I would say is retail media. So I had a conversation with Staples earlier in this series, and whether it's video or programmatic or search, I don't think you can talk about the media landscape, at least from a CPG perspective or a consumable perspective, and not talk about the rise of retailer media and how that is a new and powerful vehicle for determining inventory, for determining targeting, and really the closed loop of measurement. And a lot of that's been driven by the rise in e-commerce that directly accelerated the rise of retail media.
Right.
E-commerce is expensive, in a lot of cases dilutive, and retailers are looking to make a margin on the media side. So
yeah.
So all of those have been big factors in looking at 2022.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'm curious, since you hold a global position, can you speak to the effects of the pandemic, on consumer brands more from a global perspective? Like basically what you just went through, was that the same globally? Or, I know you're dealing with like different restrictions and all that, from one area to the next, and everything's been changing all the time over the past like 18 or so months.
Yeah, I think mobile content consumption is universal. I think we've seen that broadly. The good news is most of our categories have maintained really well. So, we saw some initial dip in sunscreen and sunblocks during that first April of 2020, and Neutrogena makeup kind of, any sort of makeup fell off, the whole category fell off. But that rebounded through the summer, and other than the lack of a real cough, cold, and flu season this last year, as everybody was masked up and hand sanitized, we've seen really good performance. So it's really more us leaning into channels that we've seen perform, that are continuing to perform, and provide that connectivity, or really allow us to operate against our high value audiences where we've seen performance in the past.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And another, something else I wanted to ask, a lot of our OTC partners, you mentioned supply and retail. A lot of them had, supply issues, which I assume was initially probably the same for, J&J brands.
Yeah.
If so, how were you able to kind of balance the supply issues with the messaging strategies? Because obviously you're not going to have creative that's, driving consumers to retail if you're having trouble keeping products on shelves.
No, we would follow either the geographic distribution of where some of that was. So at one point, Tylenol was tight, and we were really trying to shift that supply where it was needed most in the country. So follow kind of the hot spots, and then we pulled back on the advertising in that case because we couldn't supply anyway. So let's not create a kind of false narrative around it. Let's make sure that the people who need it are getting it, and there's not a run on it otherwise. So that's just a little bit of shaping around that. But yeah, we try to take obviously pull back when there are stock issues, and lean in when we're in good shape, or try to move around within a product line if one count or form is available but another's not, then try to do some light creative tweaking and get it back out there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And along with the supply issues, did you see any shift in the competitive landscape for any of the product categories, or did you see that the store brands were gaining market share at all? I know personally I was willing to try a new brand if I really needed a product, but it's not to say I wouldn't go back to my go-to when it was available.
Yeah, I mean, it just depended on where the supply was coming from. So when COVID was bad in India, and a lot of the private label brands were sourcing product out of there, private label was not available. So so it kind of followed the supply chain, and we try to respond accordingly. And yeah, there were competitors that had similar struggles that we did. So it wasn't necessarily going after it, but recognizing that it was happening, and is there at least an opportunity to make sure that we're filling that gap in a material way.
Right. And I mean, 2020 is we're not back to pre-pandemic norms, but I feel like it's a little bit more normal than 2020 was. So you think things kind of like got back to normal in terms of supply and the competitive landscape?
It's getting there. There's still hiccups, I would say. But yeah, we're seeing kind of a significant return to retail.
Okay.
E-commerce categories are decelerating relative to last year, but we're still going to be up overall. So that's actually holding as a channel pretty well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's overall a pretty positive story.
That's great.
We're seeing increases in Rogaine, which means people are wanting to get back out there.
That's awesome. Yeah, and then along that vein, a lot of consumers obviously had no choice but to change the way that they were making purchases throughout COVID-19, and we also saw a lot of changes within the consumption habits. So for example, I wasn't necessarily doing my hair and makeup every day when I was no longer commuting to the city, but since I wasn't commuting, I had a little more time to work out. So my beauty purchases were fewer, but then I was purchasing a lot more, exercise and fitness products like the Peloton that I have next to me. So curious, have you seen any big changes in the consumer behaviors? Like what were the biggest ones that you noticed? Like I know a lot of people were stocking up on certain things like that kind of.
Yeah, there was a big stock up across OTC early on. And then like I said, sunscreen usually, season starts around April and kind of maintains through July. And it was a really late start on that category because nobody was going anywhere last year. So this year it's kind of more following normal patterns. We're seeing that across our categories. I think it's been far less disruptive this year than we saw in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I have like 10 half-filled bottles of sunblock left over from the summer in our house.
Everybody does.
Yeah. So do you kind of get the feeling that these, shifts in consumption, the shopping behaviors are here to stay, or you think it's just kind of like riding it out until, everything's like fully back to a normal?
I think so. I think, there's definitely, and it's very responsive. So even in this, I think in this last month or so, we've seen e-commerce pick back up again. So it's people are very comfortable in that. Some of the changes are going to stick. There's still, at least I know personally, there's still a lot of in-store shopping happening.
Right.
In the categories, the vast majority is still in store even through the pandemic. So those behaviors are well stuck, and so we're continuing to see increases, but it's not flipped by any means. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like there are so many people that have gotten used to certain things that even if we are returned to full normal, like I know that I do Target pickup still, even though sometimes I will go to the store. It's just easier. So it's interesting. Shifting gears a little bit, I know that you mentioned CTV when we were kind of talking about, how shifts have been made in response to the pandemic. And you mentioned, more CTV activity coming up. Last week when we chatted, we were talking more how the pharma side of the business has, really dipped their toes in and started testing with CTV, but not as much the consumer side. Do you, can you talk a bit about this and how you kind of envision that evolving? And do you think that in the future, the consumer side will start to test CTV?
Yeah, and it's not that we aren't, but I think we're still probably a year out from the CTV landscape really delivering on the promise of connected advertising. So, and I say that because there are technical and kind of structural limitations to where the industry currently is and where we want it to be in terms of an advertising solution. I think number one, just differentiating costs between a 15 and 30, the way we can do in linear TV. That's the biggest impact to our ROI. We run a lot of 15s, and when you have to pay a 30-second rate on it, it cuts your ROI in half. So so I think for us to lean in on that, that's got to be solved. And a lot of times that's just a technical solved. Right now, a lot of the platforms can only call one ad unit into that break. And so whether it's a 30 or a 15, you can end up paying the same rate. So that's not been a challenge on the pharma side. We're generally running 30s and 60s, but it certainly is on the consumer side. And I think that's a big differentiator.
Yeah.
And then we've also got gaps on the measurement side. So working with Nielsen and the platforms on getting an MTA, multi-touch attribution solution in place between the partners. It's just, we don't get a reliable read right now, and on that inventory in terms of the return on investment. So I think that's also an area that Nielsen's got a roadmap that goes through most of the next year, but again, to have it really available at scale is still going to take a bit. And part of that's exacerbated by the lack of a universal device graph. So everybody's got their own system. It's kind of all over the place. You get a unique ID, whether it's a mobile phone, a tablet, a CTV, and so, there's promise behind UID 2.0 to bring some of that together as well, and have one way to manage reach and frequency across platforms. But again, we're probably 8 to 12 months out from that being a reality as well. And the final thing for us is really managing do not air lists, and on a program by program basis, and that's a technical challenge in a lot of cases as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And that's, CTV is obviously evolving, day by day. So hopefully that's in store, for the next year.
we want it to work. We love the promise of it. It's right now in the execution, and that's why we are limited on pharma. Like I said, there's not the cost differential. We don't have a Nielsen measurement solution on the pharma side, so there's a little more room to lean in there and try to work within the parameters that are available.
So in the terms of measurement, how do you go about adding a new data or measurement partner? Just understanding the portfolio is so diverse. So do you test with one partner? Obviously there's so much out there, but just, curious how you go about that.
Yeah, typically, we would look for a test case and then pilot it. And usually we try to go across a couple different categories so that we're getting different reads, because we know, skin health and discretionary categories perform differently than problem solution categories on our OTC side. So we want to be able to get a couple different reads, but generally it is kind of a test and scale based on an ROI that we're looking for then.
Okay. And then just backtracking a bit, I wanted to chat a little about kind of data and insights. And so how are you currently leveraging data and analytics to reach your target consumers? So I'm sure, being J&J, you're sitting on a ton of first party data. So do you prioritize first, or do you use third party? Is it a mixture of the two?
Yeah, it's all of the above. It's first party, second party, third party, depending on the category, what's available, depending on the market. Largely, I think that's the biggest difference, based on either, again, kind of the technical structural makeup of the market or privacy legislation. There's a vast difference in what's available and what you can use. So, and we'll test everything. So what we really, like I said, we're in a kind of high value audience approach. And so we'll put our data strategy behind that and look at, and then try to tease out, what's what is most effective based on past history, propensity, and the data that we do have available. So it's an ongoing evolution, but that's what makes the measurement then to follow up on that so important, because we don't want to just necessarily measure anything in a campaign or within any given audience. We want to be able to measure an audience over time and see, are we actually changing behavior? Are we changing understanding and awareness of that brand?
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Just, from a data perspective, is there anything out there right now that you feel could provide you with something that you're not, currently getting?
Yeah, well, I think, like I said, if we could have a universal device graph, I think that would be a good start. Something to match up with identifiers and the way we want to buy that programming. I think that would be really helpful. I think there's shifts in the market that are going to allow us to operate with retailer data similarly, where we're able to construct audiences, again, using their data combined with our data, manage for reach and frequency, and still take that consumer back to that retailer and that brand. And I think those are exciting evolutions, especially as we're on the precipice of a cookieless future. What is that next step, and how can we actually make it better? A good thing that we're exiting the cookie versus kind of this cliff that it's been painted to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we might be running a little bit short on time. So kind of wanted to end with your outlook for the future. So obviously we've chatted a bit about how the lockdown prompted shopping from home and curbside pickup. And then a lot of people also went the route, like I did myself, of telehealth. So obviously so much has changed in the way that consumers are purchasing and managing their overall health. So which part of your business do you think will see the greatest impact, and how will that affect strategy and planning for the future for the US, but also from a global perspective?
I think the telehealth evolution is, broadly, as we look at consumer health, a big step in consumers kind of taking a step on self-care. Even though it's interacting with the doctor, it's a very personal medium. It's on your phone, it's on your terms, in your house.
Right.
And I think that's going to set the stage for kind of a continued evolution of the solutions that can be provided, the diagnostics that can be provided.
Right.
I think COVID testing, again, is kind of opened the door for just assessments of other kinds that can be rapid in real time or near real time, that again may or may not require a doctor's visit or can be prescribed via telehealth.
Exactly.
But it's an interesting time to look at the space and see what what are the implications of this. And there are all the way, the insights, the needs, the opportunities are both deep and broad tied to that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope a year from now we're hopefully still not talking about COVID, but it'll be interesting to see where things net out. But it looks like Keith popped on, so Chad, thank you so much again for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, Chad, Lauren, great chat, and I would really want to go back to what really you started talking about, Chad, was that audience first approach and the challenges you're facing now across so many different platforms with so many different consumer and farmer side brands, and really just going back to what's tried and true is testing and leaning into the channels that perform well, and trying to figure out with your partners how to measure better and how to optimize better, and how to be smarter. And so it looks like we may have you back to be talking about what you've learned over the next 15 months. So appreciate it, Chad and Lauren, your time. Yeah.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
So we are going to wrap up a pretty full day of Brand Innovators Media Buying Summit, day one. we set out to highlight so much innovation and change and best practices, post-pandemic, and as brands and our industries move, media industries and agency partners, brand partners move into what the new normal is. We heard a lot about new products and services innovations today. We heard how brands have pivoted or accelerated their strategies post-pandemic. And we learned, with an increasingly more fragmented media landscape, the value of media partners and trusted partners and tech partners and data partners in finding audiences and finding them where they are and breaking through with impactful creative. So really exciting and full day of learning. So hope everyone enjoyed day one as much as I did, but we have plenty of segments to go, just not today. The summit is 2 days long, and tomorrow is when we have great segments from brand marketers representing, easy for me to say, companies like LVMH, Diageo, Uber, Kimberly-Clark, BlackRock, the Coca-Cola Company, AB InBev, Bank of America, Liberty Mutual, and more. So we expect again tomorrow so much brilliance and very little bullshit. So before we wrap up, though, I want to also let you know the week continues with more programs after tomorrow, with Marketing Innovation Livecast on Wednesday, followed by Brand Storytelling International on Thursday, and then Brand Innovators and the team rounds out the month of great events next Tuesday with another Marketing Innovation Livecast. So 2 Marketing Innovation Livecasts, one this week and one next. So if you haven't made plans already, do make plans for you and your colleagues to watch all these upcoming livecasts. And then again, tomorrow, we'll look forward to seeing you back here for day 2 of the Fall Media Buying Summit. We kick off at 10:45 Eastern, 9:45 Central, and of course, 7:45 Pacific. So from all of us here at Brand Innovators and Premion, we thank you for those tuning in the US and around the world. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And Keith Norman from Premion, and reminding you to keep innovating. Take care, everybody.